Greetings and blessings whenever and wherever, my brothers and sisters in Christ and fellow survivors of suicide, loss, and attempt. I am Brandy Johnson, ordained minister and fellow survivor of loss. As always, I want to thank you and to thank everybody who listens and joins and tunes in. We are doing new things, and it takes a lot of courage. But it also means a lot to have your support, whether or not you have been directly affected by suicide. Knowing that these efforts are supported by a caring community makes a huge difference in continuing the fight to break the stigma and openly talk about suicide. First off, guys, my apologies. Last week there was no episode posted. Normally I try to get episodes out on Thursdays, but I was in Topeka, Kansas at a storytelling summit presented by Texas Pictures. They produce documentaries about stories that matter. Their focus in Topeka was actually fentanyl poisoning, telling the stories of family members and first responders and recoveries. I was allowed a very special opportunity to speak about suicide and to tell my daughter's story. As I mentioned in my last podcast, this is the larger platform where I had an opportunity to speak a little bit more about the nurture surrounding my daughter before the time of her death. Not only is the story a first of its kind for this production company, but I've also revealed things that have not been shown or shared over the past 10 months. Again, it took a lot of courage to share those things, to share things that are painful, things that are the most painful to myself and in my family's life. And I hope the things that were said will bring awareness and prevention, but also postvention, because I've said before that postvention is prevention for many survivors. I also hope that it can give our family, my family, a sense of some type of vindication, for lack of choice words, but because there is no justice in suicide. Our justice will be found in the lives that are saved, through bringing awareness, education, and prevention and telling these stories. I believe that telling my daughter's story will help, but I could also just be a grieving parent. The funny thing about it is that the loudest voices are the ones that have lived the traumas. But I wouldn't have received this opportunity if it weren't for my cousin, who made a very special request on my behalf without me knowing, surprising me with this opportunity. Texas Pictures also has many other stories that matter on their YouTube channel, and I'll put a link in the description, the comments, or the bio for you guys to take a look at their YouTube channel. But these stories, they include peacemakers, DWI awareness, and my apologies, you guys, fentanyl awareness and fentanyl stories, human trafficking stories, along with many other topics. But suicide is something they have not covered until now. And it's humbling, but also a little weird to be the first. Nobody wants to be the first in something like this. But the Bible tells us the last will be first and the lowest will be exalted. Amen. Everything is still in production right now. But again, it's a very first for Texas Pictures. And I'm not exactly clear if it's a first just because the topic had not been presented to them yet. But I do know they had to carefully consider producing a story of this type. You know, the producer has to take very considerate precautions, not only in telling the story, but because of the stigma that surrounds suicide. And I'm not just talking about the people who shy away from a taboo subject. Now, as a side note, I do not like calling it taboo because it's only considered that way because society has put a label on what they're afraid to talk about openly. I'm going to say that again because I don't like to call suicide taboo. The only reason it's referenced as taboo is because society has labeled it that way. They have put a label on what they are afraid to talk about openly. But what I am talking about is censorship from social media. I have to take this into consideration a lot. Not only do I want to be tasteful and respectful in what I share out of consideration for other human beings, but I often have to stop and think if it's going to make a positive impact or not. Because that's what you do when you carry a cause. You measure your success, and I don't like to call it success, but you measure the positive impact to know if you are actually having an effect on what you're doing. So when you think about posting things online, when it comes to suicide, you have to consider, can I say this? Or if I say that, or if I present it in a certain manner, is it going to get shut down? You also have to consider, is it appropriate? Is it offensive? Common sense, and I say that loosely, has to be applied when we are making things public. But I'm not talking about extremely explicit content or by any means encouraging anybody to do anything like that, because I don't know who in their right mind would. But I'm talking about, what I'm talking about are the things that the bots, they grab a hold of through the algorithm. And even more so, platforms that don't allow you to say certain things because they're against their community standards, which is understandable because we do have to have control. We have to have rules. We have to have measure and regulations, or there would only be chaos. But at some point, when we look at everything else that's out there on social media and we say to ourselves, we're going to shut this down because it contains the word suicide, then we're just a bunch of melting snowflakes, pardon my pun. But what I'm getting at is we shut down the things that are important and allow other things to remain on the internet that probably shouldn't be because they get views and popularity. I think a lot of social media platforms need to reconsider their community standards and not be so biased towards suicide. It enlarges the stigma when they do that. It compounds the stigma. But again, many social media platforms, they do prompt and offer to help if you're in a crisis, and that is still much needed. But if people are talking about suicide and trying to break a stigma that surrounds it, it makes it really hard to do that because social media doesn't allow the message to get out there. And with that being said, the producer at Texas Pictures is very caring and graciously allowed me an opportunity to present the story. He was very clear and upfront about not being sure on the results. But as a novice myself, I understood exactly what he was telling me. I've been trying to break the algorithm for years. But I hope and pray that the internet's algorithm and all these community standards and all these rules and regulations don't stand in the way of speaking out about suicide. I want to publicly say thank you to Texas Pictures, to Glenn and Sherry Muse, who own and manage and operate the production company. They truly are wonderful people. You know that right from the moment you meet them. And even though I haven't known them for very long, I know all of the good things that have been said by my family who has had an opportunity to communicate with them, spend some time with them. They have great big hearts for people who have never actually experienced these types of tragedies. They are that caring community that is now giving a voice to these stories. So I look forward to being able to do a follow-up in the future, possibly. And I think it would also be really cool to get Glenn on here and do an interview, after he gets done with the production. I'm sure he's a very, very busy man. But maybe I'll get a chance to talk to him about that closer to the time the documentary is made available on YouTube. I also greatly want to thank my cousins. Even in their own trauma and grief, they provided me an outlet to be a voice. And they are being a voice for their own child who died by fentanyl poisoning. If you'd like to know more about fentanyl poisoning awareness, you can check out the podcast, Kaylee's Dad is Mad. That's Kaylee. Kaylee's Dad is Mad. Or the Facebook group. I'll try to share links to that as well in the comments or bio. But I mention it because a percentage of suicide victims intentionally overdose using illicit drugs. But I do have to stress that in the case of fentanyl, it is poison. So we have a whole nother cause to pick up there. But the two subjects actually have an area where they overlap. So I think it's important to also point that out. Suicide awareness can often be linked to other causes, such as organ donation. The last time I checked, and I've mentioned this outside of the podcast, 64% of suicide victims become organ donors. Some are pre-registered, and some families allow them to become donors in order to give back at a time of grief. It gives hope through organ donation, hence the hashtag Share Hope, Give Life. But the one that sticks out to me the most, probably, is the cause of gun control. I gave some statistics on this in my second podcast episode titled Statistically Speaking. But it sticks out to me, again, because of that issue of gun control in our country. It also disturbs me a little bit because of the issues that surround gun control itself. But it doesn't lessen the urgency for mental health care that is also connected to gun control and suicide awareness and prevention. See, we can control the guns all day long, but if we don't help people with their mental health care, they're just going to find another method, and that's why it bothers me, politically speaking. But that's a conversation outside of the one we're having here. So it does bring me to a good point, though. Mental health. Because in some cases, the mental health system is failing. Assistance in some cases is hard to obtain. And for some, because of the stigma that surrounds mental health and even suicidal prevention, it may cause others not to reach out. And once again, it's important to break these stigmas, not just in daily conversation, one-on-one, in person, and face-to-face, but online as well, because social media, made possible by the internet, has had such a huge impact on the entire world that many of us are able to use it as a platform to reach other people. People that we wouldn't normally be able to reach. Somebody needs to hear that message. Even me personally, I'm a housewife. I work from home. Everything I do is home-based. But generally, I'm alone. My husband works all day. And I am agoraphobic. It's not necessarily being a hermit, but because of my anxiety, there are days I need a mental health day. So I'm staying home. I might study for school, of course, write a letter, just watch TV, or work on a podcast, for example. But when I'm not able to get out, I still want to be able to communicate with people. Matter of fact, a few of you out there might have gotten a message from me today. A certain person gets messages from me all day, every day, and she knows who she is. But the point, my apologies, guys, I made myself laugh on that one. She does know who she is. But the point is that I'm able to use social media to make contact with people. People I don't get to see every day. And people I've never met yet. So with the majority of my work being online, like my sermons, my reels, videos on YouTube, this podcast again, for example, these are things that get those messages out there. And if any of that work is to be hindered by social media, then these messages don't make it where they need to go. As well as many other messages that have been shut down by social media censorship for being too sensitive. But for a lot of folks, social media is our access to the world. It's how they communicate. It's how we stay connected. We may not hear anything else about suicide on television, on the radio, on a billboard, but if it's online, we want to make sure that everybody has the same opportunity to be encouraged, to know they're not alone, to know that they do matter, and to know it's okay to speak up, but that it's also okay not to talk if you're not ready. But we want you to know that there are other people out there, people who share the same concerns, who are affected by the same traumas, who have similar mental health disorders, who grieve the same, whatever the case may be. So today I hope that if you're hearing this and you haven't heard it from anybody else, you matter and you are not alone. If for any reason you are in crisis, please reach out to someone, to a friend, to a family member, or even if you don't have some, or even if you do or don't, you can feel free to reach out to me. I have time to listen and I have time to talk. There's also the 988 Crisis Lifeline, the 741-741 Talk to Text, and the National Suicide Hotline 1-800-273-TALK 8255. Please be sure to reach out to someone today. And thank you guys, as always, for listening, for sharing, and for supporting this podcast. I pray that it helps to make a difference. I know it makes a difference for me, and I hope it does for you as well. And I hope it makes a difference in breaking the stigma that surrounds suicide, because we are openly speaking and talking about these things. As always, I extend the offer. If you have a story out there and you'd like to share it, please reach out and let me know. I'd love to schedule a time to get together with you. We can talk. We don't just have to, record things. We can talk openly until you're ready. But in the meantime, I'd also want you to be sure to check out Texas Pictures on the YouTube channel. You may find a cause you relate to on there. And until then, I'm always going to be looking forward to announcing the debut date once the documentary is produced. I'm also kind of scared of it. I'm going to be honest there, you guys. I don't know what to expect. And sometimes we always second guess the things that we have done or that we have said. But I know that's just the devil trying to stop me from doing what God intended for me to get done. Because honestly, I couldn't have had that chance if it wasn't up to God, if He hadn't ordained it for whatever reason. So I really appreciate each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart, you guys. Take care of yourselves. Have a mental health day if you need it. But don't forget to talk to someone if you're in crisis. So whenever, wherever, until next time, you guys. And as always, God bless.